found this man wandering around, looking very lost, frightened of all the cars, and he looked kind of familiar, and I started talking to him. And I said, "Sir, where do I know you?" And he said, "Well, I founded the University of Virginia." And I said, "Well, I really don't know." And he said, "Well, that's one of my 3 proudest accomplishments. I wrote the statute of separation of church and state for the Virginia government." I said, "Well, that's impressive." He said, "I wrote the Declaration of Independence." And I said, "Oh!" Thomas Jefferson was here in the flesh. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Thomas Jefferson back from the grave to speak to Atheists United.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Whatever you call them today. This is my document. Some of you may have read it. Some of you may actually have lived it. The Declaration of Independence was heavily influenced by Thomas Paine and a bit by John Adams and by Benjamin Franklin. Dr. Franklin was very helpful in some of the stylistic choices that we made here. And then the Congress cut it by half. So what you have here is, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature, and of nature's God, entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Signed, Thomas Jefferson. It took me 17 days to write this document. 17 days holed up in my second-floor apartments at the corner of Market and 7th Streets in downtown Philadelphia, just 2 blocks from Convention Hall. I was a delegate, one of 5, from the state of Virginia, the colony, soon-to-be state of Virginia. And we 55 men who signed this document, our purpose was to create a new nation based on law and logic, not just on military might and right. That the ideals that I espoused in here were to help alleviate the suffering of the untold millions of people who lived under dictatorships, who lived under tyrants. Now, we thought our George III was a tyrant, but your time has seen even worse tyrants. People that murder their own people in the streets, not just deny them their rights, but kill them, because they choose to stand up for freedom. And what are these freedoms? Speech, religion, or lack thereof. To be able to petition your government if you want some changes. To be able to vote. These are all the idea behind what I wrote here that eventually was enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, was to create this new nation that had never been done before. We were a great experiment. And we almost died 4 times in the first 20 years because people didn't have the experience of directly governing themselves. For instance, the British Parliament that governed us under the King had 435 members. No British Americans. None. They had 2 members there who represented us, but neither of them had ever been here. And the assumption was, we'll tell you what to do. We'll tax you, and you'll have nothing to say about it, because after all, we are the great Father in the sky. You will do what we tell you to do. And after a while, we began to realize, no, we have children of our own. We are parents, grandparents even. So we will have our own. government, our own society. And if we have to effect a revolution, we will do so. Now, that revolution started in April of 1775, a year and 3 months or so, before we finally got around to ratifying this Declaration of Independence that formally said to the King of England, "We will be free." Well, that had started in Massachusetts, and it was a ragtag army because we didn't have official armies. We didn't have a standing army, which I thought actually rather dangerous and didn't want one. So whenever the British were starting to encroach on the rights and prerogatives of the people, well, then our people gathered together, as they did in Concord and in the other small cities around, and fought, and actually began to win. So the British then blockaded Boston, and they made it difficult, and so it escalated, as these things are wont to do, until finally the British invaded full. We got help from the King of France, who was no friend of democracy, but hated the British more. Rather like Medea saying to Jason, "I loathed you more than I loved our two boys," as she slaughters them. So the British king suddenly had a fight on his hands with the French, and we got money from the Dutch, so we eventually won our war. Now, when we did create our society, we had no credit, no credibility, there was no money. We were just this pipsqueak little enclave of 13 tiny states, and Europe paid no attention to us. But eventually, we began to populate the continent. And as a result, you people here, as a result of the mass migration towards it, have become a country of 309 million people. In my day, we had 3 million white people and 1 million black people, which under the Constitution were only counted as 3/5 of a human being each for political purposes, so the South could maintain its majority, and as a consequence, they only counted as 675,000 blacks when there were indeed a million. So it was a different time, a very different experience than what you're going through here today. So I've come back here today to talk to you about my time, about any questions you might have about what we were trying to do in setting up this bold experiment, and see if, in fact, I'll be asking you questions to see if, in fact, it works the way you had hoped it would work. So who would like to be the first guinea pig with a hand up? Yes, sir.
Why do you believe that religion is essential for a moral society?
We'll need the microphone for the questions, please.
Okay. Who has that floating microphone? I'm not sure what that is, but if you need it, you need it. Somebody just had it. Well, let me repeat the question. It'll make it easier. Why do we think that we need you people, or my people, need religion in order to effect a moral obligation to this society? Is that what I'm
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Oh, my turn. Go ahead.
Hello. Check. I'm asking you, Thomas Jefferson, why you believe that religion was essential for a moral society.
Well, let me say that I had no problem believing in God. That was something that was important to me. I've been raised with it. I saw it on my level. No reason to challenge that. And I did believe that Christianity was, in fact, the best religion ever invented, if that's the right word, but ever handed down by God. I really thought that it was the best, but it also occurred to me that it could have been a lot better if it weren't for the followers. Oh, I hear you agree with that. The idea of moral certainty or moral graciousness, I'm not quite sure what word is right today. The idea was that if we were to live the wisdom that religion can teach us, we would be better individuals. Now, when people take the so-called the wisdom of any religion and pervert it into one of hatred and killing and moral certainty, then generally you'll end up doing bad things to your own society or the society of others if you invade. So I thought the idea, still do, the idea of believing in a beneficial God, a benign God, one that is willing to inculcate honesty into people and to give them the moral certitude to live a good life as opposed to a selfish life, I did believe in that. And I thought it was, again, terrific. I actually thought the Unitarian Church would become the National Church of America, even though we weren't supposed to. I wrote to John Adams, I said, I believe that every young man born today will die a Unitarian. That's wrong. But it happens. Yes,
That's the microphone over there.
I'm interested in the Bible that it seems like you, if I'm right, you cut out parts of the Bible that you didn't like. And
it went from that to this.
And I was of the opinion that you were part of the deists.
Well, yes, no contradiction there, if I may explain. A deist is someone that simply believes in God. You don't necessarily have to believe in anything else. I did happen to affect a very basic form of Christianity, but never belonged to a church, never went to anybody's services, did my best to erect this wall of separation between church and state, because I thought it mandatory for a government to exist without people of strong moral persuasion telling other people what to do and killing them if they didn't do it. So I didn't want any part of that. I took the Bible in 4 languages, in Greek, Latin, French, and English, laid them all out, spent several months doing this, and I cut out everything in the New Testament that I thought I'm Jefferson. I thought that Jesus, and mustn't confuse the two. That I thought Jesus could not have done these miracles that everyone said he had done. It was written down as if it were truth. I just couldn't believe in it. So I took out all the things that I believe Jesus didn't do or say. As I say, it shrunk the New Testament to, I don't know, what, about 100 pages or so now. No. X-rays. It took. It's very small. Beacon Press, $24.95. In case you're interested. But I didn't publish it during my time because I knew that terrible people would do terrible things to me if they found out. But it was published after my death. Yes. Have you read it, sir?
No, sir.
Oh,
I'd love to, though.
Yeah, take it apart. Take out the things that you wouldn't want to see in it. Yes, sir.
Hi. George Washington.
I'm going to get to that in a second. He's asking a question, and then I'll come right back to your slavery. Yes, it's on, sir.
Yes, George Washington, and when he left the presidency, warned the people that followed him against what he called faction, or what we today would call party. You immediately plunged into faction, founding the Democratic Republican Party, which dominated United States politics for the next 25 years. I'm wondering, and the tone of politics in your day made swift voting in our day look a little mild.
Yeah, it was pretty nasty.
So I'm wondering what you feel about faction or party today.
Well, I actually wrote that if the only way into heaven was to belong to a political party, I wouldn't go. Because of this partisanship, you're using your phrases here, the factionalism was, I'm right, you're wrong. And it doesn't work. A democracy works worst when 51% of the people in power tell the other 49% of the people not in power what they should do and how they should live. No, I said, no. In my inaugural address in 1801, after a very, very bitter House of Representatives fight, I said, we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists. And the fact that we disagree on principle imputes criminality to neither side. And I believed that, except for Aaron Burr. That's a whole other story. But the idea was that the fact that you had won this time didn't mean that you would win the next time, and therefore you must work out the problems with your fellow legislator. That's the only way it was going to work. And you'll have to forgive me if I continue saying fellow and men, because women were not a part of the government at that time, and wouldn't for another 150 years, which is a shame. But there you have it. Yes, sir. Microphone. Yes.
Mr. President, I don't know if they called you that back then, but I will do the formality.
I refuse to be called Your Excellency because I thought that was too king-like, and I didn't want Washington to do it. Let alone
No, I wouldn't call you that either.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. When you got together to form this experiment of this United States concept, did you ever imagine that these states would disunite in less than 100 years over the slavery issue?
Yes, actually I did. In the Missouri Compromise of 1820, where Maine came in as a free state and Missouri was entered as a slave state, it kept the Senate at 40 each. There were 20 states, there were 40, then split down the middle between slave and free states. At that time I wrote that because we have not dealt with, and I tried 4 different times in this country to do away with slavery, even though I was a slaveholder, which I'll get to the nice lady's question in a moment. But I tried. I put it into the Declaration of Independence, and the states of South Carolina and Georgia both said, we will not belong to a United States of America if you do away with our peculiar institution of slavery. So John Adams and Benjamin Franklin came to me privately and said, you must take out the clause. We cannot pass this if it's still in there. So with great reluctance, I took it out. I put it into the Articles of Confederation, but nobody would vote for it. As governor of Virginia, I tried to outlaw slavery, and I couldn't get a second on any of this. And lastly, I tried to put it into the Bill of Rights, and it was struck down. It just was not voted in. Its timing was not right. Slavery was evil. I called it a pernicious evil. I said, I tremble for my country when I remember that God is just. What were we to do? The majority of the people did not agree. The law of the land was that slavery was normal, good, it was in the Bible, you can find it, both Old Testament and New Testament, and therefore it was graciously given to us by God. Not my God, you understand, but certainly not your God. But their God, some people. So the justifications were all there, and there wasn't any groundswell of opinion until starting in the 1830s, when the Friends and the Jews both started to agitate for freedom, for slavery, to do away with it. France had done away with it in 1799. Britain had done away with it in 1835. And it took our country, the Great Schism, the Great War, to finally, in 1866, do away with slavery altogether. And I had thought, I wasn't sure that I could survive without slaves economically, but I got into terrible debt. So at the time of my death in 1826, I was $100,000 in debt, which was a huge amount of money at that time. So as a consequence, my daughter, Martha, had to sell off my beloved Monticello and all the slaves that I had not freed in my will. And we get to that in a moment. There was a follow-up question I saw a hand here. Madam, yes, you had another. Could you use the microphone there?
Spoke against slavery, but did not free your slaves.
No, they were mortgaged, much to my shame. I built Monticello and didn't pay for it all. So they had to sell it. In the 1830s, then a Jewish family, an ex-admiral named Levy, bought it, and for the next 80, 90 years tried to keep it up. But it took a subscription of the people, started by the Daughters of the American Revolution, to save Monticello, and people sent in dollars in order to refurbish it. And so that what you have today is based on the collected monies of the people, especially small people in the United States. Slavery was a great sin. It is something that I hold to my discredit. I really didn't believe that black people could be equal to white people because I had never seen one. All I'd ever seen were slaves who were undereducated. In Virginia, it was against the law to teach a slave to read or write because the governments didn't want them to know what other people were doing, such as in Haiti, where they'd over Saint-Domingue, where they had overthrown the French and created their own black nation. So our people didn't want anyone to know about that. I honestly thought we would do away with slavery and then forcibly send them back to Africa from whence their ancestors had come. Well, it wasn't practical. It didn't happen. They weren't freed in my lifetime. So whatever I thought about it, The Hemmingses, Sally, figures into my life quite prominently. I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
Yes, it was about that very thing. Today we're having a lot of problems with politicians and sexual scandals. And there were rumors floating around, if I'm not mistaken, that you were having an affair with Sally Hemings, a black slave. And would you elaborate on that and either affirm it or deny it?
Well, first, could you tell me, are you with the National Enquirer?
No, I'm not.
Well, since you coerced me and my arm is twisted. Sally Hemings was the daughter of Betty Hemings, who my wife's father had fathered Sally. And they came into my family when the girl was 7, and her father had died, so we inherited the 100 or so slaves and a lot of his debts, which I never got out from under. I supported my families, my extended families. I supported and of course, slavery was not cheap. You had to house and feed and make sure they stayed well, so they could either create more slaves or just work the fields as necessary. We were an agricultural society. At any rate, Sally was 7, so I knew her as a child. When the Congress, my wife had died in 1782, and the Congress asked me to go to France to help Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams work with the French to recognize us, to give us favorable trading credits and so on. So while I was there, I had brought my eldest daughter, Martha, and I left the 3 girls, the youngest girls, behind. Well, 2 of them died while I was away, and I realized that I only had 1 child left there. My son had died at age 2 weeks. Death rates among children were about 20% of the population at that time, because we didn't have the drugs that you have today. So at any rate, I asked my sister, who was staying at Monticello, would she please send a slave with my daughter, Polly, who was then 7 or 8, and to protect her. Well, shock of shocks, when I get to England, where the boat docked and John and Abigail Adams had taken the 2 girls in, it turned out she had sent this 14-year-old Sally, who was my dead wife's half-sister, and favored her with green eyes and auburn hair and whatnot, very light skin. So, Abigail told me later that she had bad feelings about this, but nevertheless, within a year I took her as a concubine, and we could never have married. My wife had said, do not ever marry again on her deathbed. What was I to say? Yes, dear. And then she was a slave, and miscegenation was against the law. So I wouldn't have done it anyway. It was a different time. I could never have done that. So I took her, and she bore me eventually 7 babies, 5 of whom survived into adulthood. 2 were light-skinned enough because she was 1/8 black, and therefore 2 were light enough to pass as white. I allowed them to escape, giving them $50 and a ride out of town. And they are lost to history because they could never acknowledge that they had a slave mother, because the way Jews take the same way, you're a Jew if your mother was a Jew, not necessarily if your father was one. Well, then you're a slave if your mother was a slave. So 2 of those are now lost to history, but 3 were dark enough to remain African American. I freed them in my will, and they have propagated, and so there are now descendants of my family that are black and descendants that are white. And now they intermingle once a year at the picnic, but they're not allowed to be buried in the 1-acre plot at Monticello, which is a wrong that may be rectified one day, but it's up to you people, not me. I'm not there. Did that answer anyone's question? It was a ramble. Okay. Oh, yes, sir.
Sorry to ask another question. No, I'm not sorry, really. So you say that God has endowed us with natural rights. How are they natural rights if God has endowed us with them? Don't I have these natural rights without the existence of God?
Well, if one is willing to believe in a supreme power, a supreme being that created all of this, then yes, in the act of creation, you were given. Now, in your day, with your greater scientific knowledge, I think it must be harder to believe in the simplicity that everything was created all at the same time, that foolishness that the earth was only 6,000 years old. It was just, I knew it was silly. I had been on a mountaintop in Virginia, which was quite lower than what you were used to out here, and discovered seashells on top of the mountain. So my scientific mind said, well, how is it possible to have seashells that are found on the bottom of the ocean on top of a mountain? I don't know how this happened, but that mountain must have been underwater at some time, and for a long time. So the notion that, and I understand in your day you still hear this pernicious nonsense, that God deliberately put those seashells there, he put those dinosaur bones there, he put everything else there to confuse you. Okay. I chose not to believe that. I don't think there was any formal challenging of our religious beliefs. You know, one was born into it, one accepted it. The age of enlightenment, which is what I had been born into, and then the age of reason, so called by Tom Paine, was true. I was living through that. We were taking scientific discoveries of all kinds. In fact, they tell me I'm called the father of archaeology because I actually took an Indian mound on my property, an ancient Indian mound, and cut it in half, not digging it out, but cutting it down the middle and counting strata and trying to figure out what it meant. How long ago were these bones placed there? So I was not willing to believe in the superstitions. That's why I cut them out of my New Testament Bible. I wasn't willing to go that far, but I was willing to say that God gave us our rights. And even if he doesn't exist and he didn't, somewhere along the line we had to claim them. Because there are always people who will say, no, you do not have your rights. I will tell you what your rights are. And if I don't want you to have those rights, remember that 51% of the population? If I don't want you to have them, I'll make sure you don't have them. And you're seeing that today in your country with people trying to take away certain economic and certain political rights of others that they feel are not entitled. So, the fight for freedom, the fight for democracy, the fight against tyranny is ongoing and non-stop. It happened in my time. Oh, hello, I note. I showed it in English. Please move forward towards the microphone. Thanks. Would you hold on to that for me, Ms. Jacoby?
Mr. President, I think he's referring to that funny little stick in front of
This thing here.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you see, you have newfangled days. And I don't understand any of them, but that's okay. Yes, miss.
Could you comment on
Could you comment on the international relations?
Oh, yes. Well, if you're talking about North Africa and the Barbary Coast Wars that I helped stop, I gather you're having similar problems, aren't you, with something called Pirates of the Sea? Yes. Well, you know, Sir Francis Drake was a pirate of the sea who collected Spanish booty for Queen Elizabeth to keep enriching her coffers. So piracy is hardly unknown. But what we had in the North African states of Morocco, Algeria, and Tripoli, the problem was that they were going out and raiding commerce vehicles, boats, vessels. They were raiding them, taking them, and saying, we want $100,000 to free your seamen. Well, they were taking our seamen and putting them into slavery, some of it sexual slavery, because they were much more liberal in areas that I was not. But those sailors were then had to be rescued. And I thought about it, and I thought, why are we putting all this money out in tribute to make sure that they wouldn't steal from our boats, our cargo and our men? Why were we putting up with that? So we didn't have a navy. So I helped found the navy, starting about 1801-02. And eventually I sent 4 of our ships over there. And they bombarded Tripoli. So those of you who are either in the Marine Corps or know about it will know from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. That's where the Marines started in 1798. And so we had an army on this land, but we had a navy. And so as a consequence, we lost one of the ships, the Philadelphia, which we burned because it ran aground in the harbor, and they were taking munitions to use against us, etc., etc. It was a very long, not really that long, from 1802 to 1805. And eventually, I said no more tribute, which then was reinstated by Madison, but eventually taken away by Madison. Because then once the Americans fought to stop the piracy and to stop these dictators, these tyrants, from taking our people, well, the rest of Europe found some backbone and stopped paying the tributes, and so that ended it by 1806 or 7. And that was that. So while I wasn't in favor of war at all, peace is my passion, was something that was very important to me. Nevertheless, the idea that sometimes you have to go to war to protect that which is important to you, but all you can hope is that 50% of the reason for going to that war is not caused by you. So that what we had to all do is look carefully at what war is, and do we need it? And if we do, I didn't believe in a standing army. I thought it more dangerous than bankers who were dangerous enough. But the idea of standing armies was that they could be used by a tyrant to enforce his laws against the welfare of the people. So I was I cut the army from 4,000 men to 2,700. Eventually, then we had to build it back up because we began to realize that we really couldn't defend our shores depending on militia. That's what I thought, state militia. I really thought that would be our protection. But they really weren't trained. They didn't have enough weapons. Not every American male had a weapon at that time. And certainly the Second Amendment, which I supported wholeheartedly at that time, in your time, is made much more complicated, but the kinds of weaponry you have that theoretically every child, I guess, is entitled to have. And that, to me, would have been totally enough. So if you don't like those laws, you have to work to change them. Did we answer the question? Yes, sir.
Yes, could you take a moment, or maybe two, to describe your falling out with John Adams and your eventual reconciliation?
Well, thank you. John Adams had been very, very influential in this Declaration of Independence. I myself was a very poor speaker. I had, at that time, a high-pitched voice, a slight stutter, and a slight lisp, which made me very self-conscious about public speaking. I got over it. No, they could. Just don't cast Nick Nolte. That's all I do. And because I couldn't speak, I could not defend my declaration. And it's been said that I might very well have suffered from Asperger's syndrome. I don't know quite what that is, but people have looked at my life and said, you fit that, you fit that, you fit that. So whether it's true or not, maybe somebody can explain to me. But at that time, I could not speak. I was terribly shy. So John Adams and Ben Franklin defended my Constitution on the floor of the Congress. Now, when they requested changes, closer to the monastery. So when we had discussions or disputes, they would stand up for me. And that was fine, and we got along very well. Well, when it came to somebody put my name in contention in the election of 1792, and John Adams had been the sitting vice president for 2 terms, and there was no doubt he was going to win overwhelmingly. And he did, and he got the most votes in the Electoral College. I, in fact, ended up with 3, so we're not going to win with that. Well, what happened then is that as his vice president, because until the 12th Amendment was passed, whoever came in second in the balloting became the vice president. After 1803, you had to run as a ticket, if that's the right word. You had to run as a president and vice president combined so that people know who you are, and furthermore, you'd be of the same government. That's what was important, the same philosophical intent, as opposed to having men of 2 different opinions interfering with each other. So I became vice president. I was not a Federalist, the way Mr. Adams was, but we were cordial until 1797-98, There were 5 acts passed by Congress, and because the Republicans were Federalists were in power, and as a consequence, he signed them into law, and the Alien and Sedition Acts were so unconstitutional that I just couldn't believe they'd been passed, let alone signed by a sitting president. It made it a federal offense to criticize the President of the United States, or any governor, or any cabinet minister. What happened to democracy? What happened to the idea that I can petition my government if I don't like it and say, I think the man's a crook, or he doesn't represent anything I believe in, I will not vote for him? What happened to that? It had been done away with. Editors of newspapers that supported me were arrested for daring to criticize the President of the United States. Well, this was so unacceptable that I left I left Washington, D.C. to go back to Monticello, and I sat out the next 2 years plotting how I was going to overthrow John Adams legally, by law, with the consent of the voter. So what I did was create this Democratic-Republican Party, and you can see my confusion of it today. Nevertheless, it was my party. I was the head of it. And what we did was we ran successfully. Now, at that time, you didn't campaign. You didn't go out. That was considered demeaning. So other people did that for you. So as a consequence, I ended up sitting at Monticello waiting. And when the popular vote came in, I had the most votes. But then Mr. Adams got 65 electoral votes, which was 3rd place. So he was out of the running. He was not going to have a second run at being the president there. And instead, Mr. Aaron Burr had pulled a double cross. We'd agreed that he would be the vice president. Well, we tied in the Electoral College, because he was from New York and they had a lot of votes, 73 to 73, which is now a constitutional dilemma. According to the Constitution, you have to go to the House of Representatives, and so they had over 4 days, there were 36 ballots, and on the 36th ballot, finally, Alexander Hamilton, no friend of mine, but a worse enemy of Mr. Aaron Burr, as you'll find later, he convinced one man to take his vote from John Adams' column, put it in mine, because he considered me the lesser of the 2 evils. Thank you. And so there I won, 74 to 73, even though I'd come in the highest. So the Electoral College was considered very important in my day to protect the smaller states from having the larger ones, such as New York and Virginia and eventually Ohio, from taking away some of their power. Okay, the Senate had been set up that each state got 2 people, which kept it then, the large states and the small states had the same amount of power in the Senate. But, of course, in the House of Representatives, you had to have one elected official for every 35,000 voters, populace. So anyway, it was very complicated, but I won. And then when I ran again in 1804, by this time, Aaron Burr had murdered Alexander Hamilton on the so-called Field of Honor in New Jersey. And it's so in July 11th, 1804, for those of you who were there. Could be. So anyway, I dropped him. I wouldn't allow him to be vice president. 12th Amendment had passed by 1803, so this is the first election which we actually had. So I picked George Clinton of New York, another, again, large state, Virginia and New York, could dominate, and so I won handily in the Electoral College. Why did we get off on that? Somebody asked me something about John Adams. What was it? Yes, sir. What was your question?
The question was...
reconciliation. Oh, yeah.
The reconciliation was the second part of it. How did you manage to reconcile?
That man was so angry at me for winning and him losing that he and Abigail left the president's house at 5 a.m. on March 4th, 1801, so he wouldn't have to sit on the dais with me to hand over the power, which I thought was incredibly, not just insulting, but this was a new democracy. We were handing over power. We were not wresting it from each other by force. So I was very angry at him, and for years I wouldn't talk to him, wouldn't write to him. But for about the next 3 years, I wrote to Abigail, who was a very good friend, and I have this habit of writing to married women. And And she finally wrote me and said, you know, if you're not willing to talk to my husband, you cannot talk to me. So I did not speak to her again. 1818, she died, and it broke my heart. So I wrote him a letter, and I said, Mr. Adams, we are two old men who do not need to be at each other's throats. I would like to go back to the friendship we had. So from 1818 till our deaths in 1826, we wrote quite a lot. He told me what he thought of George Washington, which was not flattering, and I was surprised. But at least we had reconciled. At least and I voted for his son, John Quincy Adams. I'd known him since he was that high, and I didn't like Andrew Jackson, who was running opposite him, because he really was a murderous villain when it came to Indians, Native Americans. My father had raised us to respect Native Americans because they had civilizations going back thousands of years. In fact, you know, the Iroquois Confederacy, which were 6 Indian nations in the Atlantic northeast states eventually, they had a pact that had kept the peace amongst them for 300 years. I didn't know a Christian nation that had kept the peace for 30 years, let alone 300 years. So the idea, sorry, I'm on the phone. This is like a dance. And so the notion that Indians were somehow savages or brutes, yes, there had been a lot of killing, but we had killed them, they had killed us. That had to stop. Eventually, then, so I voted for John Quincy Adams, who it turns out was not a particularly good president. He lost his re-election after my death. I had nothing to do with it. Yes, it was.
Yes, I'm interested in what your participation was in the separation of church and state, that whole thing that evolved.
Well, it was certainly dear to my heart. The people of the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Church wrote me a letter late in December of 1800, thanking me for, congratulating me on winning, and they had voted for me, and blah, 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 blah. Although Connecticut and Delaware were 2 states that did not care, nevertheless. These nice people wrote me, and they said, you know, we think it's good that Christianity is the law of the land. So I wrote them back and said, this country has never been Christian. This nation has never been Christian. It cannot be Christian because we have a constitution that does not recognize any religion. Therefore, we must erect a wall of separation, I wrote to them, between church and state that allows the government to exist without church involvement, but as important, it allows the church to evolve without the help of government. Because government had, up until that time, for instance, all the universities were founded by religious persuasions. It was a Catholic university, the Presbyterians, William and Mary was Episcopalian that I'd gone to, and so on. That was considered normal. So I did start in 1819, the first state-supported school, therefore not religiously oriented, when no one religion was to be taught, but rather comparative religions would be taught. Therefore giving people the right to choose any religion they want. I wrote this often. Whether my neighbor believes in 20 gods or no God, it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. It is simply not my business. Nor is it any of your business. It doesn't matter. The freedoms, the religion, America, I'm told, has the most number of different religions more than any other country on earth. For better or for worse, you have many religions, unlike, for instance, the state of Israel that recognizes one religion, that people pay taxes to support that one religion. That France or Italy or Spain had their religion, that only one religion was tolerated. So the idea of toleration is about political, social, moral, religion certainly. The idea being, it isn't your business what your neighbor does. So why is he putting his face in your business? Is the way I look at it. And I passed that down, and of course there's been a whole lot of debate and some of what you call fundies. Strange term.
Right back here.
But accurate. Yes?
Yes, I had a question, two questions actually. Did you put your hand on the Bible when you were sworn in? And second question, how many people actually went to church in your day?
Most everybody, if there was a church there, most everybody was Christian, or professed to be. If they didn't act, even if they didn't act it out, they still professed it. And did I put my hand on the Bible? Yes, it was expected. I had no problem with that. That was just part of. We didn't have. You have a phrase, I believe, I affirm as opposed to I swear. Is that correct? Sure. You don't have to swear on a Bible anymore. That's as it should be. If you want to swear on a Bible, so you will tell the truth, great. But if you're a liar and you put your hand on there anyway, you know.
So help me God.
Good, but it isn't accurate.
So help me God.
If that works.
Did you say it?
So help me God. Because I didn't even cross my fingers. No, I believe. Okay, we have one in the middle here. Fundies. I understand.
Oh, yes, I wanted to get into that. Today, I don't know if you're aware, we have this outfit called the Tea Party, which uses imagery of the revolution that you helped to bring about, combined with a large dollop of fundamentalist Christianity. There's even a guy named Glenn Beck who dressed himself up as Thomas Paine, he's a fundamentalist Christian, and he invoked the name of Thomas Paine.
That's ironic.
Yes, it is. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, yes. I cannot comment on your political, not of your day. I don't know exactly how these things have evolved. But I can say that irony is the basis of comedy. And so the notion that a fundamentalist Christians, that in my experience, this is just Thomas Jefferson speaking, fundamentalist Christians do not hold with democracy. They hold with theocracy. And they are adamantly opposed to each other. You cannot have both. So if somebody is dressing up as an atheist, Mr. Thomas Paine, a good friend of mine, had a great influence on my Declaration of Independence, and pretending to be he in order to, bring in a political system that is the opposite of what Mr. Paine or myself would have stood for, then tar and feathers, not a bad idea. We did it in my day. You might try it out. Cattle prods, perhaps. Totally up to you. We had, in the 1830s, there was a great thing called the Great Awakening, in which fundamentalists flooded the United States as it was then. And, of course, I was dead. But looking back on it, all it really does is allow scandal mongers. It allows people who do not believe in the democratic system to take over. And these rascals get into power through the good graces of the people, and then do their best to deny those same people, to deny them a second term. That is where the scoundrels come in. This is where the rogues have to be driven out of the temple, as it were. Not an analogy for you. But yes, sir.
Mr. Jefferson, I just had a question about your thoughts on Islam. We were recently talking about being sworn in on a Bible. Your Quran was used to swear in a representative that was Muslim.
Yes, I heard that. It was wonderful.
And I was just curious what your thoughts were. Islam is usually portrayed as the face of evil a lot of times. And I was curious what your perspective was.
We really weren't as aware of the way people lived in the Middle East at that time as we were in Europe. And I wrote that there never had been a priest-ridden society that ever accepted the idea of democracy. It was adamantly against it. So the notion that in Islamic society, at that time, not all the societies were intolerant. There were great Christian and Jewish communities throughout the Middle East, been there for centuries, that got along, everybody got along. It wasn't until really the 12th century when the Crusaders went from Europe that stirred up so much anti-Western stuff that took away. Christians were murdering Muslims. Well, I would never have countenanced that. The idea, again, I don't have to believe in your religion. I don't even have to believe in atheism to give you the right to be what you want. And if a Muslim, we had very few, if any, I never knew one myself, but if they wanted to come into this country and practice their religion, it was not my business. They'll pick my pocket and I'll break my leg, remember? It doesn't matter. So when you have people, I gather there was a fool in the South somewhere who wanted to burn Qurans to show them a thing or two about what? One doesn't know. Christian tolerance? Not playing that game. So the reality is that the more extremists are allowed to take power, the more they will superimpose their viewpoints and to the detriment of everybody else, even themselves, because extremists can never govern. They cannot, except by force. And eventually, as you're seeing today, those extremists are being driven out of power by their own people. Just like we did to King George, who was an extremist, took away our rights, said we didn't deserve them. All we had to do was pay taxes. And we said, we're not willing to pay the tax if you're not willing to let us be represented by our own people in the parliament. By as late as 1774, we were not going to go to war. We were not going to break away. But King George forced it by his extremism, saying, no, you will do it my way, because my way is the only way. And we fought and won, with the help of the French and the Dutch. We won and created a massive nation. And you had a question, madam? Here's your instrument of torture. A statue of me in the halls of Congress? Oh. No, I don't even know what I did to deserve it. But Mr. Levy.
Yes, he went to France.
Is that right?
Famous.
Turn on the mic.
Sculptor.
We can't hear you.
Okay, so I'll repeat.
It is a gift to the American people.
Well, so this fellow Levy, who was an admiral, who had bought my Monticello, went to France, apparently, and raised enough money, some of his own, I assume? Some of his own money?
All of his own money.
All of his own money, got somebody to actually create a statue of me, and it has never been melted down for bullets, as far as I know. Isn't that something? You may thank Mr. Levy's family. Yes, miss?
Can you talk about how you became president, please?
Well, again, this election that was thrown into the House of Representatives was really important because it was the first time we actually had two active parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, actively going state to state, capital to capital, and actually campaigning. Now, I was not allowed to; it just wasn't done. So the fact that it hadn't really been well known in 1776 that I wrote the Declaration of Independence. It really wasn't well known until I started to run for president that other people said, well, he wrote it. Now, there is some debate, I'm here to quell it, that Tom Paine wrote the Declaration of Independence and I merely copied it. A canard, if ever there was one. Mr. Paine supported everything that I stood for. He was a good man. He was in France in 1791, I think, and was nearly executed by that mad regime that had executed the king and queen and much of their own leadership. But he was saved. I think they went to the wrong door, and they didn't get to him in the prison. So anyway, he lived. So eventually he caused more trouble. He couldn't go back to England from where he was from because the king wanted to hang him. So I wrote to him and said, if you want, I will send a frigate to pick you up and bring you back. And he said, no, thank you, I'll find my own way back, which he did. Eventually he petitioned the state of New York to give him 200 acres, which then he lasted out the rest of his life until 1809 on. So he was a good patriot, never became an American citizen, but that didn't really matter. He did right by your society, and you must remember him, please. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a follow-up. Yes.
My question of how you became president, and in particular, how you overcame your stuttering.
Well, I didn't. In fact, the only speech I ever gave was my inaugural speech of 1801, and nobody could hear it past the first row. So you're lucky you have this, right? And also speech therapy. I have already answered. I became president because the House of Representatives allowed me to be president by one single electoral vote. That is why every vote counts. Let me leave you with something. If you do not vote, you may not criticize. Okay, you willing to live by that? Also, timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the tempestuous sea of liberty. Please keep that one in mind. Got a question in the back there?
Yes. Mr. President, when you became president, did you repeal all of those laws that John Adams had?
Yes, two of them had been sunsetted to end the day before March 3rd, before the new president or whoever it was would be. They were sunsetted out, and then I had the Congress reverse them. They were all five of them. You know, instead of being 5 years to become a citizen, they advanced it to 14. And it was before that time that we were quoting then Dr. Franklin, who died in 1790. We were quoting his, any country that thinks it can be both ignorant and free wants what never was and never will be. And that's one of the reasons why I became very interested in education. But he also stated that any society that thinks it can remain free by being both frightened and by doing away with other people's civil rights, human rights, wants what never was and never will be. And furthermore, they deserve neither safety nor freedom. I really believe in that. Yes, miss? One moment, we're going to have to tape you.
Were you the president who was attacked by James Cavanaugh in the Federalist Papers?
Well, not in the Federalist Papers. James Callender was a drunkard who had wanted to who wanted a position of postmaster in my administration. And because I didn't like him at all, and I had I never served hard liquor in my White House or in the President's house or at Monticello. Good French wine and strong British ale, yes. Hard liquor, hard spirits, no. So he was a drunk, and I wouldn't give him. So he came out with this phrase, Dusky Sally lives at the President's house. Which wasn't true. Sally Hemings lived at Monticello. Nevertheless, he tried to make it a scandal. And for a tiny bit, it was a scandal until people realized it's not fit to talk about. Let's not talk about that. And so it died of warning. Eventually, he drowned in his own vomit in the streets of Philadelphia. Someone you would not have wanted in your family, let alone as friends, but there you have it. Aside from that, a lovely man.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are you familiar with the memorial that was built to you in the 1940s and what's written on the wall behind your statue there?
Yes, they opened it on my birthday, April the 13th, 1943, the 200th birthday.
Yeah.
I have sworn eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the minds of men. And I wrote that specifically about religion.
Unfortunately, that's not the only thing they put up in, that was your words. They strung a whole bunch of different things together from at least 5 to 7 documents.
Which one do you like?
Oh, I wish I thought of it. I would have written it down. But behind your statue, it says something like, you support religion, you support America as a religious nation, that we can't do without religion. What they did was they strung sentences together from different documents to make it sound like you said that. I'm sorry I didn't bring it here, but I didn't think of it until just now.
And it's been so long, I forgot. And I've never seen it anyway. I can only tell you that religion per se was not important to me. God was. But that's a personal choice. And I so hate the idea that religion must be used as a weapon instead of pulling people into their philosophy, into their point of view. If you have to kill a man, woman, or child in order to prove that your religion is superior, you have done the best thing you could to disregard the ideas behind that religion, whatever it is. No religion exists as pure hate. It's supposed to be there for family. It's supposed to be there to protect people. But when it's turned as a weapon of hatred, then it has no validity in my eyes. And you all can attack it in any way, shape, or form you think is important or effective. Yes, sir?
You said you were previously dead. Is there an afterlife?
Repeat the question. Chip asks, is there an afterlife? Well, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. And I wasn't with the CIA either, but I can say that I'm here. And perhaps that's all that anyone truly needs to know. The notion of an afterlife was confusing to me. I kind of didn't believe in pearly gates and all of that, but I kept thinking that this God that I believe in is good. And he's not going to just leave me behind, whatever that means. But I was not at all, in any way, shape, or form, a fundamentalist of any kind. Except the idea, fundamentally, I believed in democracy. I believed in the human heart. I believed that people could be good to each other and with each other. I did believe that. Yes,
Mr. President, I have in my hand a magic stick that will enable the questioner to be heard by everyone here and by everyone watching on Ustream. So if you will be kind enough to follow the magic stick and call on people as they have the magic stick, that will be helpful to all of the audience.
Oh, I see. I'm picking it up. Also, may I ask how many minutes we have left, madam?
10.
Well, we're doing very well. If you're all willing to sit here
Maybe
another 10 minutes.
7 to 10.
7 to 10. Well, you'll give me a high sign, I'm sure. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm curious to know how you felt about big corporations. I know that, like the Tea Party they were protesting these big corporations, like the East India Company or whatever, which, things had to be made in England. You couldn't manufacture things here and stuff like that. And so the present-day Tea Partiers seem to get a lot of money from big corporations. Mm-hmm. And if they just knew what the original protest was all about, it seems that they've lost that understanding.
Well, they could read about it, one would think. Corporations were just really beginning. I think they're only about 100 years old that we had the beginnings of corporations from England. I knew them to be a pernicious evil, to borrow a phrase from slavery to talk about that. Corporations and banking specifically, through the use of inflation and deflation, could make us all their serfs, and thought that might happen. The corporations did not exist for the betterment of the people, let alone of the people's government. The corporations were inherently dishonest because they were only interested in money and not interested in the welfare of the people. That was my take on it. Apparently, I'm not held in high regards in some corporation circles, but that's okay because I really think they will implode always because dictatorships, tyrants cannot govern properly. They cannot. They don't believe in listening to all opinions, so they get out of touch with the people, and eventually the people overthrow them. Corporations, I gather right now today, have far more financial power in government than they've ever had, or at least in the last 150 years. Therefore, it's up to you people to decide whether that's in your best interests or not, and not acquiesce to money dictating your political life. You cannot, if you do, you have no complaint when finally your rights are taken away. And you're seeing this battle right now in some Midwestern state. I never saw Wisconsin, but Lewis and Clark had told me about it.
Mr. President.
Yes.
What are your feelings about taxation? Should there be taxes?
Well, yes. You cannot exist without taxation, but it has to be fair. You don't ask somebody making $1 a day to pay the same tax as somebody making $1,000 a day. You don't do that. We taxed. We didn't have income tax in my day. That didn't come until 1911 or something. So Imagine that, 100 years of taxation. So what you're really looking at is there has to be an equality in terms of taxation, so the rich do not continue to be rich and therefore have more power in the democratic system than people who are not rich and who seemingly then have little power. That has to be addressed through your laws, pardon me, and through your whole democratic system. You can change it any way you want. If you want the rich to rule, you can do that. But then you cannot complain when they take away the rest of your rights. The woman with the microphone.
Yeah. What do you feel was your greatest achievement, and what would be your greatest regret?
Well, politically, the Embargo Act of 1807 was complete folly, as it turns out, and damaged my reputation for at least a generation. But you don't have to get into that. Personally, I would like to have saved my babies and saved my wife. She and I only had 10 years, 9 months, and 6 days of marriage, and she was the love of my life. But with each child, each of the 6 babies that she delivered me, she got weaker and weaker. So I did contribute to her death and was very aware of it. I loved her. When she died, I was at her bedside, and I fell into a stupor for 3 days on the floor. They picked me up, put me in my bed. My daughter, Martha, was about 7 or 8 then, and she thought I was going to die, and of course was terrified. Eventually, I came out of that coma, as it were, and then I went into, it took 3 weeks to just ride my horse and try to come into contact with my grief. So my greatest regret was not understanding medicine, which I didn't. By the way, I was influential in doing away with smallpox in this country because I had read about it in a French journal. And when where this fellow, the scientist, had taken, I never understood it, but sheep serum and inoculated people, and somehow that kept them from getting smallpox. So I borrowed a neighbor's 10-year-old boy with parents' permission, and had inoculated him. Some of the smallpox came back again. He was not affected. So I wrote about that in the American Philosophical Journal, and so all across the United States, people began to experiment with that, and eventually it was done. You no longer have smallpox. It isn't a disease. So on some level, I may take. But if Ms. Kirkwood here had said, there were 3 things on my tombstone that I designed about 3 months before he died. Here lies Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the statute for Virginia for religious freedom, and the founder of the University of Virginia. Those are the 3 most important things in my life, things that I wanted other people to know about. And all the rest of it, president, or vice president, or governor, or whatever, were important, but not as important as education, freedom of religion, and freedom to think. Where a press is free, and every man can read, all is safe.
Well, one last question, Mr. President.
Mr. Thomas Jefferson, could you please tell us about your death?
Oh, very kind of you to ask. I was 83 years old. The previous year I'd been very, very sick and I had expected to die. But I came out of that, and it was June, 6 weeks or so before July 4th, 1826. That was going to be the 50th anniversary, the first major holiday of this country, 50 years of the Declaration of Independence. And John Adams and I were both alive, and we were both invited to come to Washington, D.C. for the festivities. Well, both of us were too sick to attend. I wrote and said, I'm really sorry. I am in my final illness. I wish you every happiness, but I cannot be there. So on July 1st, I was in my bed with my granddaughter Ellen by my side, and I slipped into a coma. And for the next 3 days, I would come in and out of this coma, and the first question, the only question I'd say to Ellen was, is it the 4th? And she'd say, well, no, grandfather, it's not. It's the 1st, or the 2nd, or the 3rd. Finally, about noon, July 4th, 1826, I came out of my coma, and I said, is it the 4th? She said, yes, grandfather, it is the 4th of July. So I died. And 3 hours later in Braintree, Massachusetts, 800 miles north of my beloved Monticello, John Adams, 91 years old, with his grandson by his side, sat up in his bed and he said, Thomas Jefferson still survives. And he died. And the next day, the President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, remember, number 6, son of number 2, said this clearly shows the hand of divine providence that 2 such important men should die on such an auspicious holiday. And so there you have my life and my death. Thank you so much for allowing me to